Welcome to Through the Trauma podcast. My name is Amber Larkins, published photographer, storytelling expert, visual artist, entrepreneur, speaker, and coach. This podcast was born from one question: how do I get inspiring stories of triumph out to the people who need to hear them the most? Come with me, enter my world, where lives are getting changed, heroes are getting developed, and greatness is being achieved. I'm so excited. I have a very, very special guest today that we are going to talk to. This is Miss Naima Ka'i, and she is a divorce coach. Naima and I actually met at a business thing a couple years ago. We've stayed in touch. We've stayed friends, and I'm so impressed by what she's doing because it is so needed in our community and especially in the culture that we live in. So, Naima, thank you for spending your day with me.
Yes, well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I always love having convos with you. So I'm just so elated when you said you were doing this podcast and then you asked me to be a part of it, and I was even more thrilled. So thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. I'm really excited because my vision with the podcast was to have people that share stories, but then to also have people that are experts. And you have been doing this several years, and I know you've become an expert. You've worked with a lot of different women, a lot of different stories on that spectrum. And so I'm really excited to kind of dig in and, get your expertise, and just hopefully you can share some real nuggets of truth and help and hope to our ladies that are listening.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the desire, that's the goal. And you're absolutely right. I've been in this for a few years, now, and it birthed out of just my own trauma, and my own, I would say, trauma to triumph, right? So I'm just honored that I'm able to use this platform today that we're on and just speak to the people who need what it is that I've gone through and the help that I've been able to offer other women who've, gone through it. So it's just a blessing.
So typically, and I know you have your story and we want to get into that a little bit, but first I just want to ask you, like, on a broad scale, like on a general scale, you get ladies that come to you that are in the middle of divorce or they're already divorced and they need healing. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So I help Christian women release the burden of resentment and disappointment, shame, and isolation of divorce, and specifically within the church community, so that they can move forward, in their purpose and truly enjoy their life. So there's so much that goes into the divorce process, period, right? And it just adds a whole nother layer when you're divorcing within the church community. The isolation and, the shame and the guilt and all of that adds a whole nother layer to the already stressful process and, experience of divorce. So what I do is I help women through that process. It was something that I experienced, in my life, just being, the quote unquote church girl, right, from a very young age, and grew up in the church and married in the church. I never like to say I was forced to get married at a young age in the church, but it was very, very highly encouraged. I will say that before my time, I'm going to say before I was actually ready to do so. So, the church has always had a very strong influence over, my marriage and I'm going to say my married life, right? From beginning to the end of, the marriage. So, my ex-husband and I, we had real high positions within the ministry, and always worked very, very closely in, leadership with the pastors and things of that sort. So there's a certain expectation, if you will, of how you should behave, how you should act, how you should really present, right? Mm-hmm. And so when your life has been built around that expectation, it's really hard to know who your identity is outside of that. So
Mm.
when my marriage of 20 years started to break down, I really had to do some internal work within myself, right? To figure out which way I was going to go and really what my place was, not only within the church community, but with my place with, my creator, right? And
Mm.
then also just my place in the world, period, outside of church, outside of my connection with, myself and, and God. It was, okay, well, who does Naima want to be in this world? How do I show up, in this world when I'm no longer covered by the identity of wife, right?
Mm.
As well as the cap of a Christian, wife in leadership
Mm.
on top of that, right? So um, that was my journey of understanding who I was and what that was supposed to look like at the end of the day, what my life was supposed to look like at the end of the day. So away from all of the judgmental eyes, away from the family members, because it wasn't just the my church family, it was also the isolation of friends and family outside of the church too, right? That plays a really big role. So, like I said before, divorce comes with a lot of different pressures and expectations within and without, the church, the family, the friends, you know. So
Mm.
that's what I strive to do is help women overcome, those anxieties, the stress, the
Mm.
disappointment, all of the feelings and the emotions that they're having about the divorce, so that they can really hone in on who they are as a person and how they want to show up in life and what they want their life to look like after all of this, because there is life after divorce and there's so much strength and clarity, right? And
Mm.
that's one thing that I noticed for myself and other women that I work with, that clarity plays a huge factor.
Yeah. I would say, like, so your divorce is painful. Divorce is hard. And it doesn't
Mhm.
matter if sometimes being married is hard, but divorce is hard for sure. And sometimes you're playing, I feel like that being in the church sometimes adds that extra pressure, like you mentioned, because you're not just going through the hurt and the pain of the separation between husband and wife, but now you're going through another additional layer, which is you have people in the church that are like choosing sides. And it's human nature. I don't want to call it judgment, but we're deciding
Yeah,
whose side is
right.
we're
Yeah.
on, who are we better friends with, and we'll lose friends because if we did things as a Christian couple, now all of a sudden we're a single person. And does that couple invite me or do they invite my ex-husband? And so there's a lot of pressures, and I think this is why what you're doing is so powerful, because when I went through my divorce, I didn't have anyone. And I've spoke about this before, but I felt completely alone, because
Right.
we had I don't want to say I was shunned by the church. I want to be careful how I put that.
Mhm.
My ex-husband had pulled us out of church because he didn't agree with some of the things that was happening at the church, which I think he was dealing with his own internal struggles. But
Mhm.
when we did separate, I didn't have any. There was no one called me and said, "Hey, how are you doing?"
Right.
Or and I was really
Mhm.
alone.
Yeah, and this happens so, so often. And, the thing about it, when we're going through it, when we're in it, we feel like we're alone, like we are the only ones going through this. But that's not the truth. That's just, the lie of the enemy, right? That lie of self that just says, you're by yourself. This is an isolated situation, self doubt, right? Starts to kick in, and it's really just not the truth. And so when you have someone that you can lean on, who you can talk to, have someone who can share, the vision for the future with, and just couple with you and partner with you in that space, it's so beneficial. Sometimes, when I like that you said, you are careful with the wording, like as far as shun from the church, because although it very much so feels that way, and sometimes, just to be blunt, it kind of is that way. That's kind of where the word came from. Uh, the spirit or the heart of the person who is creating that barrier or the separation may not be that of rejection, but out of fear for themselves, right?
Mhm.
So, really, what it causes is it causes a mirror for people, and they look at your situation and they start thinking, oh, well, is this going to affect my life in any kind of way? Is there anything that's going to change because I'm now friends with this person, or I'm talking to this person? I don't want anything, to any kind of spirit or anything, any kind of experience to come into my household or illuminate something that may be, bubbling in their household. So sometimes they just take the easier route, right? And most of the time, I'm not going to say all of the time, but most of the time, the women get the short end of the stick when it comes to the friendships, that they're going to hold on to. Why that is, I'm not quite sure. Maybe it's just because of the standard of men in the church and the positions that they hold, and kind of that, they are the leader type of situation and thought process. And it's just easier for people to accept what the man says and kind of their way. It just feels safer for some reason. I mean, the women most of the time are left feeling isolated.
Yeah, I wonder if also it's because the husbands being the leader, like, if you look at Christian, the tiers of Christian family to God, like the husband being the leader, if because other husbands are the leaders, they're like, well, the husbands stay friends. But then the wives, when
Right.
that couple splits, the wife goes their separate way. And it's really
Mm-hmm.
sad.
Right, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head with that. We are taught that, we go where our husbands take us. And you made a comment, your husband, your ex-husband, excuse me, and that separated you from the church prior to the actual separation of the divorce. You hear that more often than you would hear, well, my wife separated us from the church or removed us from the church, right? So it's just one of those things that kind of are innate in, in the Christian community, that the man's role is leadership, and where they go, the family follows. Excuse me. So, when you're faced in with a situation of picking sides, so to speak, or let's just say who you're going to communicate and continue a relationship with, it is typically the man, because, like you said, the other husbands side more with the man, and the woman is going to typically follow that. And I don't like to use across the boards with everything, because there's always one-offs, there's always exceptions to the rules. But I'm just talking about in general, and more of the greater number, this is what happens. So uh, the woman tends to feel isolated, and not to even get
Mhm.
into who was wrong or who was right, because honestly it does take two people for a dissolution of marriage, right? Uh, it really isn't even a factor of who did what, but there seems to be a bit more sympathy and empathy for the men's roles, in part that they played in the dissolution of the marriage versus
Mhm.
the woman,
I
right?
totally agree with you there. It's our roles are just very different as men and women, I feel like. And it's unfortunate, but I I think sometimes it's the way that it is. And I think sometimes when that happens, women just have to be prepared that there is any breaking of any union is going to be difficult in many, many aspects. Can you talk to us a little bit about, like, so when you and your husband split, you said that you felt some of this in the church, but that journey, like, of almost like self discovery, would you call it that? Self discovery from the
Mhm.
time that you guys ended things to the time that you're in now?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I really got to the point where I was questioning, is this for me? Is this really what God has for me? I'm not happy. This relationship is not working out of, everything that I tried. And believe me, I love marriage. I think it's a beautiful thing when done right, right? I think that it's an amazing coming together in a union. However, just because, divorce is bad, right, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's wrong, right? And so I struggled with that in the beginning as far as God. I know that the scripture says somewhere in there that, you hate divorce, and the church really emphasizes on that. And sometimes I feel like that's not in context, but that's a whole other topic. However, my relationship and my communication with my creator, I had to really go into depth with that and say, okay, who am I without my husband at the time? Do I still have a connection with you, God, individually, right? And if so, I need this time to be about you and I, right? I know now that this marriage, this union is not going to work out with us three. So do I still have a place in your kingdom? Do I still have a place in your heart? Right. So that was the first step that I had to, come into alignment with. And I had to
Mm-hmm.
be okay with that, because my faith was something that was so strong for me and has been a pillar for me just my whole life growing up. Like I said, I grew up in the church, was a church girl, right? So that needed to be strong. And once I got that together, I really felt the urge to say, dig into you. I'm going to be here. So dig into you, figure out who you want to be in life, how you want to show up in life, and what you want your life to look like.
Yeah, that is so good. I totally agree with you. I can only speak from my own personal experience, but I know for me, I have went through that same thing when I was going through divorce, like trying to discover where does that leave me and God. My husband, like I never blame him completely because you said takes two. There were certain things I didn't do. I didn't uphold, certain wifely duties. Maybe I wasn't there available as much as I should have been or whatever. But
Mhm.
ultimately, there was an affair that caused the dissolution of my marriage. And
Mhm.
in that, I I gained a deeper understanding of God, like a deeper relationship with God, because I only knew God through him. But when
Mhm.
he was no longer there, now I it's up to me to really learn God myself. And it's
Yeah.
been a beautiful journey.
And that honestly is the first step within, and even else, because I also work with women who are not, who go through divorces outside of the church too, who don't have the Christian faith like I do, right? Um, just outside of the church. And even the women that I work with outside of the church, that's still an important factor. Maybe they don't serve the God that I serve, or they don't have the same outlook of God that I do, but there's always a coming to, right? There's always a higher power, a connection of higher power, whatever, however you want to look at it, whatever you want to call that, you have to come to that point of connectivity, because people are meant, and we were created to have connection with something, with somebody, with something. We're not created or formed to be in this realm or this world unconnected to something and somebody, right? So it's a grounding for
Mm-hmm.
us. So when you are able to connect with your higher power, that ignites something in you. And what I found is it creates like a domino effect, right? It creates a source of trajectory for the rest of the self discovery to come into place. It's a land, a takeoff space, so to speak, right? So once you have that grounding, once you have that connection, you're able to really look inside of yourself and ask yourself the hard questions, which is, who am I? How am I showing up in this world? Why am I showing up in this world the way that I am? Uh, I take women through this process called the drill, right? And it really is, basically a way to, drop emotional tension of that anger and that frustration and that sadness, and really start to release all of that guilt, that maybe has been pent up for prior to your marriage. Because at this point in the space that you're in, it's no longer just about the marriage, right? It's about you. And so whatever you came into the marriage with, whatever you're leaving the marriage with, all of those things are going to come up for you in order to shape the person that you are becoming, right? And you have to become self-aware of that. And then once you're able to drop that emotional tension and really release that shame and that guilt from a lifetime of all of that, the circumstances, you're able to really imagine a new vision for you, a new version, if you will, of you. And once you can imagine the goodness of that, you can really start living with that expectation, right? So that's pretty much, the process that I take women through. And it sounds like it's, so simple, like, oh, okay. But when you really get into the program and really get down into the nitty gritty and actually, deconstructing what that means to really identify those emotional wounds, that's deep and that's hard work. And you don't want to do that by yourself, right?
Mhm.
A difficult place to be, but it's so rewarding at the end of it. And it's necessary for the freedom that is on the other side. And what happens so often is, like you said, I deal with or coach women who are in the process of divorce, but also so many that have been divorced for 5, 10, even 20 years, Amber, and they're still struggling with the same issues that they were struggling with within their marriage and after their divorce. So it's like, if you don't do the work, you will carry it from one year to the next relationship, to the next relationship. And it really impacts your whole entire life. It doesn't just impact your relationships, it impacts your career, how you show up for other people. It impacts, finances, because your mindset is limited to what you think you um, expect, right, of self. It impacts your overall physical health. And I know you can attest to this because you are in like perfect physical physiqueness. Um,
Oh,
but I love it. I look at your arms and I'm like, yes, I'm going to the gym today because Amber's arms are fire. And I need that in my life. You inspire me. So,
well, thank you.
um,
Thank you.
right. But I could look at that before, and this is a great, I'm so glad that actually came up. Thank you, God, because, before when I would look at another woman's body, so to speak, when I was not in a good place, it would take me deeper into depression. But now when I look at another woman's body that I admire, it gives me inspiration, right? Because before I didn't know that I was worthy of that. I felt like I was beneath that. That type of image for me wasn't obtainable for me. I wasn't beautiful like that, or that was just for them, right? But now that I know who I am and I know my worth and I know that I am the apple of his eye, right? I know that his joy is my joy and my joy is his joy, right? I feel like, yes, I can have those arms too. I can have that relationship too. I can have that career too. I can have whatever it is that God has put in front of me that I desire, because that's what he desires for me to have, because he knows that I'm worth it. And because he knows that I'm worth it, I know that I'm worth it, right? But that mindset can't take place when you're still holding on to past wounds and traumas that you might not even be aware of, right?
Mhm. There's this thing, like, I keep thinking in my mind as you're talking, like this thing of baggage, that's a real thing. Like we
Oh, yes.
collect all these bags all along the way of our life. We collect them. And if we don't take some time to like drop them and get rid of some of that baggage, it can
Mm-hmm.
destroy us. That I know one of the things for me when I was going through my divorce, I focused on me. I tried not to focus on him because we're part now. So what's the purpose of pointing out all the things that he did or that I felt like I was victimized or whatever? I'm like, I don't let me take and look at what I did wrong so that if I should ever get married again, I can then be a better wife the next time. So I pointed every finger back at myself, trying to find what the things I did that was wrong. But that baggage is a real thing. You carry that stuff around, it will kill you. And you're right, in every area, it will kill you in every area.
Right. You're absolutely right about that. And it limits you from really living your full, purpose in life and just feeling like you have a fulfilling life. And I hear a lot of people say, well, I don't know what my purpose is. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing, in life. And a lot of that comes into play because they haven't taken the time to discover self, and to deal with the baggage and the issues that have been haunting them for years. And they keep pushing it down and pushing it down. But what happens with that is when you continue to push that down, it limits your vision, right? It limits the opportunities that flow into your life. So when you are in a place of freedom, when you're in a place of good mental health and clarity, you're able to see things and appreciate things in a different way, which changes your frequency, which puts you on a different vibration, right? And it allows things to attract to you as far as opportunities and new way of, you know, looking at things, right? But when you're still stuck in your old habits, in your old ways of dealing with things, your old perspectives, your old ways of viewing different situations, you're always going to experience the same, right? So if you're stuck in everything that you've known, you're only going to produce more of the known into your life. But when you stop and you interrupt, that mindset, and you start looking and viewing things from a different perspective, that's when you're able to see things from a different perspective and see opportunities, see giftings, see talents, see things in a different light that you may be attracted to, right? That you would never have even seen before because you wouldn't allow yourself to see it. So it goes so much deeper than just a simple divorce, right? Just a simple not that it's simple, but it goes so much deeper than just the divorce, just the breakup. You're so much more than who you are within a marriage, right? The
Mm-hmm.
marriage does not define the totality of who you are, right? Now, it can definitely emphasize, but it can also be to your detriment too, as if it's not aligned correctly and if it's not for you and your forward movement and growth, right? So I I I'm not really the coach to work with women who are on the fence about getting a divorce. That's not my calling. That's not what I like to speak to, because that to me gets into more marriage counseling and things of that sort. Uh, there's different, coaches that I can refer them to for that. And sometimes it's not necessarily marriage counseling. It's actually, counseling within your marriage, but it's just separate. Kind of like what you were saying. You just focus on yourself and then maybe, the marriage would improve. But for me specifically, I uh, help people and coach people through the divorce process once the divorce is already filed, once they are sure beyond a shadow of a doubt that that's, the journey that is best for them to explore, or either, the women who have already been divorced and really need to change their mindset around the divorce and how it's still affecting them in their day-to-day life.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
It's such a beautiful thing, like that, what you're doing. Um, because I think so many women get, they get caught up in that moment of like not knowing who they are and trying to discover their purpose. And you have grown. This is the thing, like, especially as a Christian marriage, it's expected that a part of you has kind of morphed into a part of them, but it does not negate the fact that we are, we still have our own personal relationship with the Lord. It doesn't mean that it's not painful, but it's definitely something that's up to us to discover. And there is life after divorce, and there's sometimes, you know, God takes you through different things. And I truly believe that marriage is like one of these things where you can hold a mirror to your face and you see a whole new side of yourself. Because that person can push you in places you're like, I didn't even know this part of me existed in there. And divorce
So
can do the
true.
same thing.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a beautiful opportunity for people
Either
to
way.
say, let me grow. Let me see how I can grow. Let me see how I can get better from this. There's a learning
Yeah,
lesson in everything that we go through.
it is, Amber. And, the thing is, that is life. And that's what makes life so joyous and purposeful is the self-discovery of self. You know, everyone wants this, oh, what is my thing that I'm supposed to give to the world? What am I supposed to do? I'm going to be the next Mother Teresa. I want to run for office. I want to change the world. That's all great, right? But don't forget your true purpose. Your first purpose, right, is to know thyself, is to know you, is to know the creation that the creator created, right? That is your first purpose, your first gift. That is, your present is to know you. You are a soul experiencing life on this earth, right? That is the gift of life. So appreciate that first, individualize that first, and then everything else comes about, right? My mom used to have this saying, well, she still does, but she used to say it when we were little, my sisters and I, and says, charity starts at home and then spreads about, right? And and she used it wrong, right? She would use it in a way where, okay, so you need to clean the house first before you go over to someone else's house and start helping them with their chores. You need, so that's how she used it, right? Right, because that
I
was the
love
thing.
it.
So, right. You better make sure, your family's taking care of your little sister or whomever before you start going over to someone else's house and doing that. So, but there's a lesson in that though, right? It's, charity to yourself starts first. Helping yourself comes first. Putting on your own mask comes first. Pouring into self with with self-care comes first. And then from that, everyone else reaps the benefit, right? And it makes giving so much easier because when you're not right within self and you're in lack of love yourself, when you're lacking excitement about life yourself and joy and happiness yourself, it is so hard to be that light for someone else. And it comes off as very inauthentic, right? People
Mm-hmm.
could read through it. You get drained, you get sick of it, because you're trying to put on, right? But if you just become that person first, if you just do that work first, everything else will come into fruition for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I teach in, my 12-week course is just that, after completing the free and clear course, your heart and your mind really moves into alignment and your confidence in self just skyrockets, right? Your
Mm-hmm.
vision for life becomes more focused, and you're able to achieve success in all areas, like we spoke about earlier, in love and health and career, you know? So as you become emotionally healthy and, whole, the beautiful life that you were meant to live really does ever come into fruition. but it does start with self, like you were saying.
Do you find women, I see this sometimes, no, I wouldn't say I see it a lot, but I see it sometimes where women will want to get divorced and then immediately get back remarried. And I'm of the belief, now this is my own personal belief, but I was of the belief like, no, I need time to like heal. I don't even want to date. I don't want to, I mean, and I know it's different for everybody, but I truly needed time for myself. But can you talk a little bit about that for women that maybe has gone through the pain of divorce and then they're like immediately searching for that
Right.
next person?
So I see it on both ends. And I see the women who go right into a relationship. And then I see the women who swear off men for a lifetime. Right. So, but I'll speak on the first one, because that's what you asked about. And, my answer to that is just what you said. It depends. There is no one size fits all. What I will say is the one thing that never changes is the self discovery, the internal piece that you have to go through. Now, you may be a soul that was created to partner with someone in that. There are people in this world who just literally do better with someone, right? Um, that's just how it is. They receive things differently. It's just it's a smoother flow for them. I can't say if that's healthy or not, but what I can say with that is when you go from relationship to relationship, ask yourself, am I doing this to avoid my emotions? Or am I doing this because this person helps me deal with my emotion and helps me heal from my emotions? Which aspect am I coming from? Right? Because if you're trying to cover up, if you're trying to withdraw, if you're trying to run from, then it's not a healthy situation at all, because you are going to be right back in the perpetual cycle of crazy and scattered emotions, right? But now, if that person truly is kind of like, your ace in that time, your shoulder, your backbone, your support, and kind of sometimes your mirror to say, hey, this is a trigger for you. This is an area that you may need to work on. And you have that love and that support. I don't care if it's 2 days after your divorce. If that's what you need in that situation, by all means, find your healing. Do that. And if it's, and now I'm not going to get into all of the other, what that looks like romantically and all of that. That's between you and your creator. But as far as your healing process is what I'm speaking on, it doesn't matter, Amber, but ask yourself what you're doing it for. You know, why, why is this
That
important to you?
that's really good. And that's not, because I do a lot of self talk myself. I ask myself a lot of questions, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that I would encourage all women to constantly ask yourself those questions. And honestly, this is where having a coach comes in, because those
Yes.
are questions that like what you just said, I had never thought of those particular questions. So being able to come in and say, what am I really doing this for? Like,
Mm-hmm.
really digging deep into your own psyche and figuring out what it is and why you do what you do in every regard. But
Right.
relationships is a big part.
I was just speaking with a lady who has sworn off men because of all of the drama and trauma that all men cause, in her mindset, right, in her world. But you can see when you have that mindset of all men do this, all men hurt me, every man in my life has affected me negatively in this emotional capacity, and you're continuing to chant that, right? What energy and frequency are you putting off? What are you going to manifest in your life, right? Because that's
You
all that
attract.
is attraction. It's just another
Mhm.
way of saying attraction, right? I know, and sometimes it can sound a little woo woo in the church community, but manifestation and attraction and speaking it into existence and faith, all of those things are, this one of the same. It's about where your mindset is, what you are believing, right? What you have faith for. If you have faith that you will receive nutty men, you're going to continue to receive nutty men, right? And that's what's
Mhm.
going to be in your gravitational pull, right? Um, but once you dig down into why do I feel this way? And what about me is attracting these particular men outside of just me simply stating that that's what it is? Is there something that I'm giving off? Is there something that I'm doing in this relationship that is promoting that type of experience, right? When you get down into that, you're able to say, okay, I need to have some alone time, um, because I understand that it's unhealthy for me to be with another person because of my expectations that may be unhealthy of other people, or say of other men. And in that situation, no, it's not healthy for you to jump from relationship to relationship because you're not doing the internal work that you need to do as far as the expectation and the burden that you're putting on to someone else and expecting a different result, right?
Oh, that's so good. That is so, so good. I'm in the South, and the church does have some issues with like attraction and
Mm-hmm.
manifestation. But when I read scripture, I
Yeah.
actually feel like he talks about this in scripture. He talks about the energies of people commingling. He talks about a lot of the different things, like what we focus on, we're going to
Mm-hmm.
attract. He tells us to focus our mind on good, healthy things, not meaningless stories. And I mean, I'm not quoting scripture here, but I think it's so true. And I agree with what you said as well. Like, it does come with knowing where you're at. That's such awesome advice. Um,
Yeah, there's power in that. Transmit your pain into power. Is what I like to quote to my clients, um, because we all have pain. We all are going to go through it. It's just a natural part of our life here on earth. We have an adversary. We have a good and a bad, good and evil, whatever it is that you want to call it. But it's all about how we go through life and deal with that, right? Our perspective of how we show up in the midst of adversity. It's not a magic fix. Once, some people believe that, okay, well, once I have these tools, Naima, and I go through this 12-week process, life's going to be just great. I should have these, expectations of my life just going forward. I shouldn't have to deal with these issues ever again in any relationship, right? That's not always going to be the case, but it's your outlook, right? I deal with things every day that try to throw me off course, right? Um, but the difference is how I respond to it now, how I view it. Am I going to, some things may always be a trigger for me, may always be a trigger, right? But it's how am I going to deal with the trigger now? So, personally, for me, words of affirmation have always been my thing, right? My, my ex-husband used to compare me, to other women, or a whole different nationality of women, actually. So I needed that constant validation of um, worthiness, of acceptance, right? And when I didn't get that, it triggered me to act out in other ways, be it withholding my love, be it, withholding wifely duties, be it, having an attitude. My anxiety showed up and my sadness showed up in ways that added to the stress of the relationship, but it was because of the trigger that I was internalizing, right? The story that I was telling myself when I didn't get that affirmation. So, and then once I went through this journey of, divorce, I actually went a little further back and noticed that it actually started with my dad, right? It actually started from feeling like I needed that, validation. And I just felt like I never got that. And it's continued on to my marriage and even in the relationship that I'm in now, which I absolutely love and admire and is everything that I want it to be. My guy would say things like, oh, well, you should match this with that. Or I would think, well, he didn't say that, I look nice in my dress, or, things of that sort. And, of course, not meaning anything by it at all, but how I internalize it is negative, right? Because it's a trigger
Mhm.
point to me. It's something that, is something that I've dealt with. Um, Probably, my entire life from a little girl. So it doesn't necessarily go away, but now I'm able to identify it instead of
Mhm.
making the situation worse and reacting to that trigger. I'm able to identify it and say, oh, okay, that made me feel a way. What about that made me feel that way? And is that true? What story am I telling my mind? Right? And is that story a correct story? Right? And what do I need to do right now? And what do I need to say right now in order for me to feel better in this situation? Right. So it's that type of mentality and that type of self reflection that is needed to go forward in a healthy relationship in a healthy way. But unless you have the tools to do so and the strategies and the know how, the wherewithal, the support, and also just the energy to do that, because sometimes it can be very heavy, to do that self reflection. uh, you're not going to live out to your full potential. You're not going to achieve that healthy, happy, whole, and prosperous lifestyle, right? We
Mhm.
don't want to just become, a community of women who have survived divorce. We really want to become a community of women who thrive after divorce.
It's the true essence of empowering each other as women because we all have our own journey. It's very easy to look at somebody else and not, because we don't understand, sometimes we judge. And I think it's just awesome when you can reflect on some of those things and move to a place of true empowerment in not only yourself but in others as well. Why don't you tell our audience a little bit about where they can find you, like if they are interested in working with you, because you're doing such an amazing thing. And I know women all over are hurting, and suffering through these things. And like you said, they need tools. So where could people connect with you more?
I'm more present on IG at Pro Moment Official. I'm also present on Facebook, but I like the interaction on IG a bit more. And of course, in Pro Moment Official on both IG and Facebook. And of course, my website, pearl-moment.com.
That's awesome. Tell us real quick where the name come from. I know there's a meaning behind the name.
Yeah. So my grandmother used to say, let me drop these pearls, right, on you. And so would me pearls, she would mean let me hit you the game or let me give you some advice from my wisdom, right? I'm gonna give you this pearl of wisdom, right? And so when I was going through my transition, my triumph, my trauma to triumph, I remembered those pearls that it gave me throughout my life. And I said, you know what? Pearl moments. I'm like, oh, that was a pearl moment. That was a pearl moment. And then it just kind of became my thing. And it's, this is what I want to give other women are those pearl moments. And as I began talking to other women, they also gave me those pearl moments, those aha moments, so to speak, right? And so that's just where it came from. I thought it was cute.
That's beautiful. I know you had shared that with me a while back, where that came from. I couldn't remember the exact story, but Naima, thank you so much for joining us today. Is there anything else that you want to add before we close up? You've dropped so many nuggets today.
Oh,
Just what a great conversation.
yeah. You know, I think that we covered so much, and I'm just elated, honestly, that I get this opportunity to share my story. And if it helps one other woman, I feel like I've done a good thing, right? And that in itself is where I feel like I get my purpose from. And I'm just thankful and I'm grateful that I went through that process and I was able to turn, that trauma into a triumph. and I'm able to help other women do the same, it's such a blessing and it's so humbling, and I'm so grateful. And that's it. Let's continue to transmit our pain into our power and glorify, right?
Yeah. And lift each other up. There's so much power in that. Just being able to help the one, we all need it. Sometimes we're all weak. We all have those weak moments, and having someone to pull us up to be strong in those moments is powerful. So thank you for everything that you do. I appreciate you so much.
And thank you.
Thank you for listening to Through the Trauma podcast. If you have found value in this episode or believe in the mission behind what we are doing, please subscribe so that you never miss any future episodes. Also, be sure to check out our transformation project at transformationthroughtraumaproject.com, where we help inspirational stories get heard on a larger scale through multiple platforms. If you know someone who can benefit from this episode, please share it with them. Until next time.